my first time at this institution, and I'm happy to be here in Kerala once again. My name may not indicate this, but my parents were both from Kerala. So I'm a Malayali who is ashamed to say he's a Malayali because he doesn't speak Malayalam. Yeah, my mother was from Colin, and my father was from a village close by, Tangaseri. And when I was a young boy, I spent many, many happy holidays in Kerala. And when people say, are you from Goa? I say that, people from Kerala, if you tell them, are you from Goa? They take it as an insult because Kerala is far, far beautiful, much more beautiful than Goa itself. Of course, underlying the beauty of Kerala is a lot of sadness and strife, a lot of unemployment, huge effects of globalization, great degree of alcoholism, a lot of wife beating, which is sometimes little known, and so on. And of course, your Kerala police is competing with the police from the northern states in respect of torture and extrajudicial executions, fake encounters, and so on. Again, a factor which is very little understood about Kerala, that it has very high levels of state violence. I, of course, have been doing some of the cases when they come to the Supreme Court, but it's a worrying aspect of Kerala. So, underlying the very placid and idyllic and beautiful Kerala, there is another side to it, which is of human rights violations. As far as the students are concerned, and I would like to address the students particularly, I really wonder what the situation is here, because I wonder if the students in this institution, the students in the colleges of Kerala, whether you are really oriented towards using the law in the struggle for human rights. Because ultimately, one may speak at seminars, one may make, write papers and so on, but the real test of the using of the law is whether as a young lawyer, you can live and work among the poor, organize them, mobilize them, and struggle for human rights with the poor. When I grew up, I didn't grow up as a lawyer at all. I graduated from IIT Bombay in civil engineering. And while I was in civil engineering, I joined the slum dwellers movement. So I left home and I started living in a slum in Bombay. And you can put that off, please, if you don't mind. Put that off. I started living in a slum with my wife then at that time. And we lived in a slum and organized slum dwellers against evictions. And then I met a very radical militant trade unionist called Datta Samant, who ironically, considering the fact that I now practice in the Supreme Court, ironically, he had a principle which said, never go to the courts, fight on the streets, use your muscle power of the working class people to fight for their rights. And it is within the slum dweller movement and it is within the trade union movement that I learned to think like a working class person thinks. We are all middle class people, we come from middle class lives, we make PowerPoint presentations, we write papers, we get degrees, we get scholarships, we are middle class people. But how do you represent the poor if your eyes can't see what the poor see? How do you speak for them or represent them in court if you don't feel in your heart the anger that they feel? Not the suffering. I'm not in the suffering aspect. I'm not into this suffering business. They feel anger. When confronted with a human rights violation, when a person is beaten by a policeman, he doesn't suffer, he feels anger. How will you represent that if you don't feel it yourself? And that's why I say for all young students who say that we are going to do law at some stage, or we are going to do law for the poor or human rights, it's not the UN. I know many young people now, when I talk to them and I interview them for our law offices, and incidentally we are trying to expand our law offices in Cochin and Trivandrum, somewhere it will come that they want to go to the UN and do something. It's a waste of time. I have never in my 25 years of practice ever used the UN or ever found the UN helpful in the developing world for the poor. Never. You might quote a UN instrument, you may quote a, CEDAW or whatever, Child Rights Convention and so on. But it is the Constitution of India which gives you the most powerful tool possible. And I say not just in India, the most powerful tool in the world. The Constitution of India, to go to a court, to go to the Supreme Court directly and get quick reliefs for people instantaneously. And so the focus has to be downwards. The poor, the struggling, the fighting, the trade unions, the women's organizations, the disability groups, the HIV groups, the slum organizations, the tribal organizations, to live and work among them. Learn from them, like Mao Zedong said, and correctly so. Live among them, learn from them, be among them. Represent them. Or like Ambedkar said, organize, agitate, isn't it? And that's how I learned. My teachers in law were not my law professors, because my law professors themselves had never been to a slum. And my law professors had very funny ideas about trade unions being, mafia gangs and so on. They had very funny notions, and they taught very funny notions in college. So my teachers in law were the trade union people, the slum people. I lived in a colony like that. I could see how they lived, I could see how they talked, I could see what their reactions were. And I learned one thing in my practice. I learned to see life through the eyes of a working class person. And when things happen, it's not great law theories that come into my mind. Oh, international law, the law of self-determination of nations, oh, UN conventions. It's not these things that come into my mind. When I argue a case, it's my anger. It's my feeling of bitterness. It's my feeling of exclusion, discrimination, inequality, injustice. Those are the things that dominate the discourse of a good lawyer. And I can tell you one thing, because now I'm little good at the Supreme Court system, so I can tell you one thing. Any lawyer who starts with, case law and this and that, lordship, doesn't work. It is direct communication of injustice. And I've seen people who are not lawyers. I've seen people come in their dhotis up to the court, shake, namaskar sahab, and then they will argue their case brilliantly, because they're able to communicate an injustice that falls within the parameters of Article 21 or Article 14 of the Constitution of India. Right to life, equality, non-discrimination, and so on. What do we have in our country today? Somebody said globalization and so on. We have a situation in our country. And let me tell all you young people, because you are in your 20s, so you will go through the future now, not me, but you. 80% of Indians, through all this grand UPA globalization, all this grand Modi talk, 80% of India are below a poverty line of 100 rupees a day. €1 a day, €1.50 a day. 80% of Indians. And if you think this state will survive like this, if you think there is a grand future for you where massive smart cities will come up, there'll be affluence everywhere, your future is going to be very different from the last 25 years. India is on the brink of an economic and political crisis. We are masters in the art of camouflage and subterfuge, so we can hide it. We can paint over the cracks. But you can't have a country stabilized and politically sustainable where 80% of the population lives in such abject poverty. And because you have abject poverty and people protest, as they do all the time, the Adivasis say, I'll not give my land. Kerala has many struggles. I hope you've been there and you've actually been to those areas, Wayanad and all those areas where the tribals are struggling against evictions. They say we'll not give our land, you can take our land, we'll not give our land. We'll not give our land, we'll not give our water, we'll not give our forests. Huge struggles. And because there are huge struggles, you have the armament, the arming of the state. Kerala police, I know I've been doing some matters about Kerala police also very well armed, police in Tamil Nadu very well armed. One used to think that the south is a bit more civilized than the barbaric northern states. But I think they are rapidly catching up. Because I did some of the Veerappan cases and I saw the torture by the special task force in Tamil Nadu. When they pursued the tribals, while pursuing Veerappan, they pursued the tribals, and the torture that they engaged in those cases went to the NHRC and so on. So the state arms itself. And the brutality is unimaginable. So young people have to get out of their very naive existence. Very naive. Comfortable, you know. And more important, if you don't mind me saying so, although this may sound a little sacrilegious, young people must stop listening to their parents. Please. Because the parents have seen 25 years of so-called affluence of the middle class. You see, from 1990 onwards, the affluence of the middle class, they've seen that. So their parents can't understand. If a young person goes to work with a trade union, if a young couple goes to work in a tribal area, what are you doing after spending so much on your education? What are you doing? You're destroying your lives. You have to make your own lives. You have to go where God takes you. You have to go where the Spirit inside you takes you. And if it is against your parents' wishes, so be it. My father, after educating me in IIT, he could not understand why I was living in a slum. And he was not a rich person, he was a lower middle class person. He needed income from me to actually support the family, and I had none to give him. And so parents will all tell you, you know, don't go this way. But ultimately, I realized only one thing in life. As you get older, if you are not doing something which your heart desires, you will never be happy. And all your life it will be inside you that I ought to be doing something else and not this. I ought to be doing what I felt I should have done when I was young. I didn't take the risk then. Now I'm 40 years old and so on. Now how can I take that risk? You must always do things that make your heart happy. And if you want to know, are you cut out for human rights work? Suppose you ask, am I cut out for human rights work? What's the answer? I'll give you a simple answer. When you see injustice, do you get a gut reaction of anger? Anger, a very positive emotion, let me tell you. When you see injustice, are you inclined to pass it by? Are you inclined to say, oh, too bad, but I've got other things to do? Or do you feel a burning anger inside you? If you don't, go for intellectual property rights, taxation, commercial law, everything under the sun. But if you feel an anger inside you, you have the first steps of being a good human rights lawyer. And I have all my life felt anger. I don't know where it came from. Because I was not personally discriminated against, except I was beaten by a few policemen once in a while. But I was never really badly treated, but I had a lot of anger inside me. And I learned to channel it in my law to represent poor people properly. You will have many judges giving you all kinds of cock and bull stories about the law. Learn to disregard judges with grey hair, just as you disregard me also with grey hair. This is the time of change. I'm saying this not to be very, pleasant and, shocking or whatever. This India from 2015 onwards will be a time of great turmoil. And if you look to leaders and say, the judges are my leaders, this is an elderly judge, you should know what he's talking about. It's not like that anymore. You see in Parliament, right? So you know that there's no one in Parliament. There's not a single person in Parliament. Can you think of a single person who can guide young people and say, young people do this and do that? Is there a single person in Parliament you can look up to? Now you can ask, is there a single person in the judiciary I can look up to? Like there used to be Krishna Iyer, right? Is there a mini Krishna Ayar today in Kerala? Is there a minuscule Krishna Ayar anywhere in the Supreme Court? Or in the High Court here? So who do you look up to? So learn to think for yourself and afresh. Learn to be iconoclastic. Learn to disregard tradition and practice and all this thing, because Indian traditions and practice are the most horrifying in the world. Be not proud of that tradition and practice. It is not a practice of resistance. It is not a practice of speaking out boldly immediately. It is not a practice of organizing and saying, I don't agree, sir. You may be a judge of the Supreme Court, but I'm sorry. The presentation you gave today, I don't agree with you at all. We had S.B. Sinha, for example, I'll give you an example, in the Supreme Court, who said, and then he later became very active in the Judicial Academy, he said, globalization is here to stay. And he told all the High Court judges don't look at the old socialist jurisprudence of Krishna Ayar and all that. All that is bankrupt and obsolete. And then we had a fight back in A.K. Ganguly, who said there are some judges in our court who are dazzled by the glitter of globalization. But if you look below that or you look behind that, you'll see that globalization is nothing else but a system of extreme exploitation. So a political fight in the court itself. Of course, different generation. He came a little later from S.B. Sinha and so on. But there are many people who believe that this globalization has been good and so on. And the answer is, how can it be good if 80% of Indians today below 100 rupees a day? How can it be good, for God's sake? Can you talk of any country in the world where you have these levels of torture, extrajudicial executions and disappearances? Thousands of people. Go to Kashmir, somebody spoke of self-determination. I wish we had just spoken of self-determination for Kashmir, because it is time the legal community stood up and said, all this grand theory and all that is all right. Let's speak of self-determination for the Kashmiri people. And then there'll be a civil riot in the auditorium, because half will say no, half will say yes, but it's a very good debate. Do the people of Kashmir, all of them say Azadi? Self-determination. Anyway, we have, because time is limited, we have a very powerful tool in the Constitution. We have the most powerful tool in the world. No constitution and no case law on public interest litigation, which I don't want to give you a PowerPoint presentation on. No case law, no constitution is as powerful as the Indian Constitution. In the West, locus standi, individual must go to court. Here, anyone can go to court, right? You know all these things. I don't need to lecture you on that. If the orders of the court result in the budget increasing by $5 billion, so be it. Supreme Court says we are not interested in financial impact. If it's a fundamental right, implement. Continuing mandamus, where the court will keep the case before it and implement the orders of the court. Not pass an order like the South African court. Pass an order and then keep it there. And then hopefully somebody will implement. No, the court will pass an order, the court will implement that order. Right? The collection of evidence is not the burden of the petitioner as in traditional jurisdictions like Western jurisdiction. The petitioner must prove, not at all. The petitioner will state the violation. It is the burden on the court to collect all the information, to prove torture and so on and so forth. Yeah. The commissioner system and so on and so forth. We have the most powerful tool in the world. We have the amenities all around us. You have lovely institutions like this institution here. Young people, I would implore you, think of being pioneers. Think of being adventurers. Be brave in the world. If you are not brave when you are in your 20s, you will be terribly boring when you come to your 50s, let me tell you. Yeah. So time is now. You are at that cusp. You are at that critical period where you have to take this. And it's not new to India, it's new, we are in the globalized period now, so people have forgotten. But in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, young students took a lot of risks with their lives. They went to rural areas, they worked among the poor, they organized them, they stood up for injustice. Now it's a little safer for you because you're a lawyer. So you can set up legal aid centers in rural areas, you can come to the High Court and do cases, you can come to the Supreme Court. And if you come to the Supreme Court, I can tell you, we'll give you a lot of help. And I won't tell you, no, I'll argue your case. I'll say, okay, come, I'll sit by your side. And you argue your case in the Supreme Court. Fascinating work has happened. Just tell me when I have about 3 or 4 minutes left, right? Fascinating work has happened. I did the right to food case, which brought relief for some 350, 400 million people. Not entirely satisfactory, but it's a remarkable case in terms of the outreach of the court. We've done the All India Drug Action Network case where the Supreme Court said drug prices must come under price control. Just look at these cases. One petitioner, one lawyer. Look at the impact. Drug prices in our country are the highest. The profit rates of pharmaceutical companies is 1000%. The drugs that you routinely buy across the chemist, if you buy the generic version, it will be 1/10 that price. What you get for 1 rupee generic, you will pay 10 rupees branded. Supreme Court said, put it on price control. And in the famous Chhattisgarh land case, somebody mentioned land and land disputes and so on. Have you all read the judgment of the Supreme Court in Nandini Sundar's case? How many have? Titch. Very bad. Nandini Sundar versus State of Chhattisgarh. Right? Where the Supreme Court said, who are the terrorists? Who are the real terrorists? Are they the tribals who organize themselves and arm themselves with bows and arrows and start shooting at the Jawans? Or is it the corporations that come into their areas to push them from the land? Who are the terrorists? And the Supreme Court answers the question by saying that it's the corporation with their private armies that seek to take over the resources of the tribals who are the real terrorists. And then, which are the institutions that support the corporations, the state and central government? In Chhattisgarh, can you imagine? In Chhattisgarh, where the state council said and the senior advocates all argued, sir, they are fighting for the nation. He said, what are you fighting for the nation? You are fighting for the lands and minerals of these poor Adivasis, that's what you're doing. And finally the Supreme Court said, the real enemies and the real terrorists are the IMF and the World Bank. Can you imagine? The institution which everybody praises and says, the IMF, the World Bank says this, World Bank study and all that. These are the institutions that are promoting violence against the poor and displacement from land. Please read that judgment. It's available on SCC online. You'll get it in Manupatra. Nandini Sundar versus State of Chhattisgarh. On environment, 3 minutes. 1 minute more? I'll finish 3 minutes more. I'll finish very quickly. I'm used to judges also controlling me. In the environment cases, you must have heard about the controversy recently in the papers, right? Where the power minister, I think, was sitting next to the Justice T.S. Thakur, the next Chief Justice of India. Very moderate man. Not particularly inclined to, say very strong things. A very moderate man. Nice man. Power minister lectured him. You judiciary, you are interfering with all of us and so on, your judicial outreach. We are doing development projects and you are interfering. And I think I was not there, I think he got furious, so he turned, because it's not in his nature to talk like this. He turned and told him that when you do malgovernance, when you do things that break the law, not only will we pass orders and stay orders, we will do it again and again and again. The judiciary standing up for itself. Now you have a bill coming. Let me tell you, the most dangerous thing for democracy is happening. That drama is being played out in the Supreme Court. Where the state seeks to have a very big hand, starting slowly in the appointment of judges and a veto power in the appointment of judges, which means that if any judge is outspoken and strong, all you have to do is produce some fake IB report that this judge is linked with Naxal, like they do, I'm told, here in Kerala. Human rights defenders are all linked with Maoists and they've arrested a number of them, isn't it? So now this judge is also very sympathetic to Maoists and so on. And that's the end of the judge's career. So I'll stop here, my friends. I've run out of time. I just want to end by saying we are very anxious to expand human rights law network activity in Kerala. We have an office in Cochin, but we want to expand. We want to do Trivandrum also. Maybe we should go to the tribal areas and set up small legal aid centers there. But we are looking for young people who are mini Che Guevaras. Not all of us can be Che Guevara, but mini Che Guevaras, right? And if you learn from the people, they would be the best learners for your life. Not only in terms of struggle and social work, but also in terms of law. Thank you very much.